Hi, welcome to the Cool Tool Studios. I'm Ardell Ryan. Today we'll be making this beautiful Wild Roses necklace project. We'll be using my new Jewelry Artist Element sheets in the Wild Roses design, and I'll also show you how to use this new template. This is my findings and bails template that I created so that I could make findings and connectors and bails that are an integrated part of the slab. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you everything that you need, and I'll also give you a couple of different options for finishing. I start by making each of the links. I need to condition my clay first. I make a little patty out of it and then butter one side with slick, and then I knead that in. Then I roll a slab 8 cards thick using my rolling frames, and then select the design that I want from my Wild Roses Element sheet and spritz the sheet with cool slip so the clay releases cleanly. Then I place the 8 card slab on the texture with a number 6 rolling frame and roll that down. Then I place my textured slab on a tough card. I'm going to make the impressions for the findings using my findings and bails template. First, I want to trim the slab a little bit, and this will give me a deeper impression with the template. I put a little slick on the template, line it up, and impress the shape. Then I use a small ball burnisher to mark a divot in the center of each tab that I've created. Then I cut out the shape using my Ultra Clay pick, and this is a rough cut. I don't want to try to do this perfectly because I'll be sanding this later and refining the shape. Then I remove the scrap and set the piece aside to dry. Once I have all my pieces trimmed out and dried, I can then refine the shapes and drill the holes. Here I'm using a 4-cut needle file to clean up around the finding. I sand right up to the outline I impressed with the template so it's clean and flush. Then I'll refine and sand the rest of the shape until it's smooth and clean. Now I can drill the holes for either jump rings or rivets. To connect the links with jump rings, drill a 2mm hole. To make rivets, the wire and the hole need to be exactly the same size. The hole size that I'm going to need is determined by the wire gauge that I'm using. So I'm going to measure the diameter of the wire with a sliding gauge. I put the wire in the gauge and then close it, and then pull the wire out without moving the position of the jaws. And then I find the drill size that fits the opening exactly. Then I can go ahead and drill the holes. After firing, I polish each of the pieces. I fired these bronze pieces in magic carbon to get an antique finish, and I'm using a barrel-shaped Superflex polisher in a fine grit to polish the raised design. If you're going to connect your elements with jump rings, then you're ready to assemble it now. Here's a couple of different linking options that you can use to add some interest to your piece. You could use a single jump ring, or you could use a fancy jump ring from a vintage chain like I have here, or maybe something a little bit plainer. Or you could use beaded links. These are just a couple of different ideas. For a riveted assembly, I need to re-drill the holes because they've shrunk during firing. I install the same drill that I used for the pilot holes in my Fordham and enlarge the holes. Bronze is a very hard metal, so it's a lot easier to enlarge the holes than to try to drill through a solid piece. Now is the time to apply a wax to the surface if I want to do that. Keep in mind that a wax will darken the surface. The connector on the right was finished with Renaissance wax, and the piece on the left is untreated. The rivets are made from 20-gauge sterling silver wire that's been balled up on one end, and then I'm using a faceted rondelle crystal to add sparkle and color. Before I start assembling, I like to arrange the elements the way that they'll be riveted. Here I have alternated the links on the top and the bottom. Laying these out this way helps me so I don't get confused when it's time to assemble. Because the ball is round and the crystal isn't flat, it makes riveting a little bit tricky. I can't use a flat surface or a riveting anvil because the shape of the crystal would allow the wire to bend. And I need to also protect the crystal because this is sandwiched between two pieces of metal, and if I start hammering on this, that crystal is going to break. The other thing that I need to do is allow for movement. So what I'm going to do is use 2 small pieces of copy paper on each side of the crystal, and that's going to give me a cushion for the crystal and also allow for the movement. But I still need a way to hold this while I do the riveting, so what I'm going to use is a product called plastic vise. Plastic vise is a plastic material that's softened in hot water and becomes pliable. Then I embed my assembly into the plastic vise and hold that there until it cools. To cool it quickly, I can place it in a bowl of cold water. When it's cooled, the plastic vise is hard as a rock and even a hammer won't dent it. So make sure that it's cool before you go on to the next step. Now I need to trim the rivet wire using ultra flush cut nippers so there's just a nub of wire visible. The nub should be as tall as the wire is wide. To form the end of the wire into a nail head, I use the peening end of my chasing hammer and I just tap down the edges of the wire to begin spreading the metal. I continue tapping with light force around and around the end of the wire until a nail head is formed that's flush to the surface. Then I soak the plastic vise in hot water again to soften it and remove my assembly, and then I can tear out the bond paper, and this gives me just enough slack for movement. Here's a nice additional touch for the balled wires. I use a cut burr to round the balls. This will make all of the balls uniform and shiny, and it gives it a more professional look to the piece. So I'll continue until all my pieces are riveted, then I'll add a chain and a clasp, and I'll give it a final polish and a buffing. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this project. Visit us online at www.cooltools.us, and you'll find a PDF file in our Learning Center that gives you step-by-step instructions and all the tools and supplies that you'll need to create this project.